Welcome to the 7th video in the Colored Pencil course, brought to you by thevirtualinstructor.com. In this video, we're going to discuss reflection and transparency. In this module, we'll take a look at a few things to consider when dealing with reflection and transparency as we complete the still life drawing that was started in Module 6. Drawing glass objects can often be intimidating to artists because of the complexities of value and color that are observed. When these areas of value and color are ignored, the resulting image does not translate as transparent glass. Understanding what you are seeing and simplifying the information makes the process of drawing reflection and transparency much easier to handle. We can simplify the process of observation into three basic categories. One, we're going to be looking for contrast in value. We're also going to try to create varied intensities to create transparency, and we'll look for reflected shapes. We're going to be looking at all three of these things concurrently. First, let's take a look at the glass itself. You'll notice the complexities in value and intensity. First, we're going to be looking specifically for highlights, or areas where the light is most intense. We're also going to pay attention to the midtones and the contrast between the highlights and midtones that happens within the glass. We're also going to pay special attention to reflections. Now, when we're looking at the wine glass and we see all the highlights, midtones, and reflections together, it can be a bit overwhelming. So we're going to look specifically for shapes that are made by these reflections, highlights, and midtones. And when we simplify what we're seeing down into basic shapes, it becomes a whole lot easier to digest all that information. We're going to start the wine glass just as we did the other two wine bottles that were completed in the previous module, by completing an underpainting using dark umber. We'll establish this shape, which is predominantly a lighter value, by darkening the areas around it. We're going to repeat this process throughout the completion of the wine glass, paying attention to the shapes that are created by the dark and light values. It's important not to become consumed by the idea that you are drawing a wine glass. Instead, you should focus on the shapes and contrast in values that happen. And if you just think about what you're actually observing and put that information on your paper, then you should be successful creating the reflection and transparency that's necessary. Now, as I create the underpainting, I'm going to go back and enhance some of the values, making them darker where they need to be darker. It's always a good idea to start lighter and then slowly work darker instead of getting too dark too quickly with your applications. Now, you may notice that there are strong areas of contrast that are defined by heavier, more defined lines. What I mean by that is there's not a slow transition between dark and light values. This is a characteristic of reflective surfaces. Usually there is a strong line that happens between areas of midtone or darker value and areas of lighter value or highlight. With a substantial underpainting created for the lower portion of the wine glass, it's time to take a look at some of the shapes of reflection and highlight that happen in the upper portion of the wine glass. Here again, we're going to make no assumptions on what we should draw. Instead, we're going to pay special attention to the photo reference and just the shapes that happen there. We'll pay close attention to areas where there may be some highlight. For example, on the left edge of the glass where the highlight is exceptionally strong. There's even a point where the contour line disappears completely. The wine glass is curved, therefore some of the lines that happen on the surface should be curved as well. It's important to note this in your mind, but still pay attention to what you're actually seeing. Remember, Don't get overwhelmed by the amount of information that you're bringing into your mind. It really is just simply looking at the lines and shapes and changes in values that happen. Now we're ready to start adding some of the local color, and in this case we're going to concentrate on that varied intensity. We'll start in the area at the bottom portion of the wine glass where we can see some of the wine through the glass itself, and we'll begin by adding dark purple in these areas. We can intensify the darkness of the value by going back over those areas with dark umber. This enhances the contrast and intensifies the darker values. Next, we'll take a white and start to burnish some areas and establish some of the highlights in the lower portion of the wine glass. Using the white pencil, we'll burnish the predominant shape that happens in the lower portion of the wine glass. This creates a smoother transition of value, which is more true to the photo reference. We'll also use some of the olive green that we used on the wine bottles to show some of the translucency that happens in the wine glass, as some of the wine bottle that's behind the wine glass can be viewed through the wine glass itself. We'll use olive green, indigo blue, and dark umber here. Crimson red is used to intensify the top portion of the wine that's actually in the glass itself. We'll also use white to burnish some of the areas in the middle portion of the wine glass. Our background is going to consist of a warm gray, so we'll begin with a warm gray, burnishing some of the areas that we created with the underpainting. We're going to vary the amount of pressure that we put on the warm gray here so that we can create the illusion of transparency in the glass. Most of the midtones that are visible in the wine glass are established using this warm gray. The areas of contrast between our midtones and highlights become very evident in this step. The lower portion of the stem of the wine glass is addressed here using the warm gray over the top of the dark umber and then burnished with the white pencil. We can also go back into the lower portion of the wine glass with a bit of dark umber to intensify that transition between dark and light value. We'll burnish those areas using a white to create a smoother transition. We can also address the highlights that happen in the upper portion of the wine glass using the white. In the process, we can soften up edges and smooth transitions if we like. We can also further adjust the intensity of the color by adding the white over the gray. There are subtle areas of color that are reflected by areas around the wine glass. We'll add these using the colors that are observed, first with olive green, then with dark umber. These colors should be subtle and not overpowering. Too much color or too much intensity here might overpower the reflection and the illusion that we're trying to create. Here, a few areas of darker value are intensified. These small areas of darker value exist all around the wine glass. We can again revisit the warm gray and smooth out transitions and adjust intensities that exist within the main portion of the wine glass. Working back and forth between the warm gray and the white, we can adjust the effect until we're pleased. We can also slowly intensify some of the reflected colors that are observed. Here's a look at our drawing so far. Next, we'll move on to addressing the grapes. Just like with the other portions of the drawing, we'll begin by establishing an underpainting using dark umber. More pressure is put on the pencil to create the darker values, and less pressure is used for the midtones and highlighted areas. The grapes on the left side of the picture plane are addressed in the same manner. With the underpainting completed for the grapes, we can move on to the local color. Here we'll begin with dark purple. Medium pressure is applied here so that we don't get too strong with our application of dark purple. Next, indigo blue is layered on top. Combining these colors creates a more natural looking color of gray. It also adds more variety and interest to the finished drawing. Next, using a white, we can burnish these colors together, creating a smoother transition between values and a more natural look to the grapes themselves. I'm careful not to move too much of the indigo blue and dark purple around on the surface, instead preserving some areas of intense highlight, which is more true to the photo reference. Now we're ready to add a bit of cast shadow behind the objects. We'll start with a warm gray, and then we'll layer over the top of that using the dark umber. We're also going to use the warm gray very lightly to begin to establish some of the tonality that exists on the surface. Although the table surface may appear white, it's actually just a lighter value of gray. We'll burnish the entire surface using a white, which will allow some mixing to occur in the areas of cast shadow, smoothing out those transitions of value. Now we're ready to address the background. In this case, we're going to use a 70% warm gray pencil. We're going to start with a medium application of the color in the background. We want to create a transition between a darker value on the right side and a lighter value on the left side. This transition should be subtle, so we're going to address this with a series of applications and burnishing techniques. We'll start by burnishing the background using some Turpenoid. Next, we'll create the subtle shadows that happen on the surface behind the wine bottles. We'll accomplish this using a dark umber. Then we'll burnish that area in using the 70% warm gray. We'll continue throughout the entire picture plane with a light application of the 70% warm gray. A paper towel is used to protect the areas that have already been completed so that no smearing of the material happens. Once this application is complete, we'll go over the top of it with a colorless blender, burnishing this second application. And then lastly, we'll use the 20% warm gray color with a heavy application to complete the background. And now our still life drawing is complete. Here's a look at what was discussed in this module. We took a look at how to create transparency and reflection in a colored pencil drawing. This included paying attention to the contrast in value and creating varied intensity to create the illusion of transparency. We also focused on the reflected shapes that were observed in the photo reference. In the next video in this series, we're going to take a look at how to transfer a photo or a drawing to another surface.